The $13 billion warship that can't fight. The USS Gerald R. Ford disaster. The USS Gerald R. Ford cost $13 billion. Billion with a B. It's the most expensive warship ever built. It was supposed to revolutionize naval warfare with electromagnetic catapults, advanced arresting gear, and cutting-edge technology that would make it the most capable carrier in history. Instead, it became one of the biggest defense acquisition disasters in modern history. The electromagnetic catapults didn't work. The weapons elevators broke down. The arresting gear couldn't stop aircraft reliably, and the Navy ended up with a $13 billion ship that couldn't launch and recover aircraft. The literal purpose of an aircraft carrier. Today, we're exposing the complete disaster that was the Ford-class development. What went wrong, who's to blame, and whether the Navy's flagship carrier is finally actually combat-ready or still a floating money pit. This story involves catastrophic engineering failures, Pentagon cover-ups, and taxpayer money wasted on a scale that will blow your mind. Hit subscribe because this gets worse with every detail. The promises. In the early 2000s, the Navy sold Congress on the Ford class with incredible promises. This wasn't just a new carrier, it was a revolutionary leap forward. The Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System, EMALS, would replace steam catapults. The Navy promised EMALS would be more efficient, require less maintenance, launch aircraft more smoothly, and enable higher sortie rates. They said it would launch 25% more aircraft per day than Nimitz-class carriers. The Advanced Arresting Gear, AAG, would replace hydraulic systems with computer-controlled electric motors. The Navy promised smoother recoveries, less wear on aircraft, and greater reliability. The ship would generate 3 times more electrical power than previous carriers, 13 megawatts. This would support future directed energy weapons, advanced sensors, and all the new electrical systems. The crew would be 600 fewer than Nimitz-class carriers through automation and improved design. Fewer crew meant lower operating costs, supposedly saving $4 billion over the ship's 50-year service life. New dual-band radar would provide superior detection. Redesigned weapons elevators would move ordnance faster. Everything would be better, more advanced, more capable. Congress bought it. They approved funding. Construction began in 2009. The carrier was supposed to commission in 2015, fully operational and ready to deploy. Here's what actually happened. EMALS didn't work. During testing, the system failed repeatedly. Catapults broke down at rates far exceeding acceptable limits. The Navy's requirement was 4,166 launches between failures. EMALS achieved about 400 launches between failures. That's 10 times worse than required. Aircraft were damaged during launches. The electromagnetic system couldn't be properly calibrated. Launch forces varied unpredictably, stressing airframes. Pilots reported violent launches that felt like the aircraft was being beaten by a hammer. The advanced arresting gear was even worse. It couldn't reliably stop aircraft. During testing, arrestments were so rough, they damaged landing gear and airframes. The system required constant recalibration and still didn't work properly. The weapons elevators, supposed to use advanced electromagnetic technology, became a national embarrassment. The ship was supposed to have 11 weapons elevators. After years of construction, only 4 were operational when the ship commissioned. The failures multiply. Let's detail exactly how bad this got. Ford commissioned in 2017, 2 years late and billions over budget. But commissioning means the Navy took delivery. It doesn't mean the ship actually worked. The weapons elevators continued failing. These elevators move bombs and missiles from the magazines to the flight deck. Without functioning elevators, you can't arm aircraft. Without armed aircraft, you don't have a combat-capable carrier. The Navy promised all elevators would work by commissioning. Then they said 3 months after commissioning, then 6 months, then a year. The goalposts kept moving. By 2019, 2 years after commissioning, only 7 of 11 elevators were operational. Congress got involved. The House Armed Services Committee held hearings. Navy admirals testified that everything was fine, progress was being made, and the issues would be resolved soon. Then, months later, it became clear nothing had been resolved. The Trump administration specifically called out the Ford. President Trump visited the ship and said the Navy should go back to steam catapults because the electromagnetic systems don't work. The Navy insisted EMALS was the future and just needed more time. Testing revealed more problems. The propulsion system had issues. The radar system wasn't integrated properly. The computer networks experienced constant glitches. Basic systems that should have been straightforward had cascading failures. A 2019 assessment by the Department of Defense found that Ford had 13 critical deficiencies, problems severe enough to affect combat capability or crew safety. These weren't minor issues. They were fundamental failures of major systems. The cost overruns were staggering. Ford was supposed to cost $10.5 billion. It ended up costing $13.3 billion. That's $2.8 billion over budget. For perspective, $2.8 billion is enough to build multiple destroyers or submarines. The follow-on ships in the class, Kennedy and Enterprise, were also billions over budget before they even launched. The entire Ford class became synonymous with defense acquisition failure. Why it happened? So how did the world's most advanced military end up with a $13 billion ship that didn't work? The answer is systemic failure at multiple levels. First, concurrent development. The Navy decided to design and build Ford while simultaneously developing brand new, never-tested technologies. This violates basic acquisition principles. You're supposed to develop and test technologies, then integrate proven systems into new platforms. Instead, the Navy built EMALS, AAG, and advanced elevators while designing and constructing the ship. When these systems failed, they couldn't just stop construction and redesign. The ship was already being built, so they pressed forward, hoping engineering could solve problems on the fly. Second, overly optimistic timelines. The Navy consistently underestimated how long new technology development takes. They promised capabilities on unrealistic schedules because realistic schedules would have made the program unaffordable politically. Congress wouldn't have approved a 20-year development program. So the Navy said 10 years, knowing privately it might take longer. This culture of overpromising became endemic. Third, contractor incentives. The shipbuilder, Huntington Ingalls Industries, had cost-plus contracts for much of the work. This means they got paid for their costs plus a profit percentage. There was limited financial incentive to control costs or stay on schedule. When problems arose, the solution was more money and more time. The contractor wasn't penalized for failures. The Navy couldn't switch contractors mid-construction, so problems compounded. Fourth, technical arrogance. The Navy's engineers believed they could solve any problem given enough time and money. When emails failed, they kept tweaking, adjusting, modifying. They refused to consider that maybe the fundamental concept was flawed. This attitude persisted, despite mounting evidence. Test failures were explained away. Concerns raised by operational personnel were dismissed. The engineering team insisted they were close to breakthroughs that were always just around the corner. Fifth, institutional pressure. Careers were tied to Ford's success. Admirals who championed the program couldn't admit failure without destroying their own careers. So they presented optimistic assessments to Congress while privately knowing the ship wasn't ready. Whistleblowers who raised concerns were marginalized. Critical assessments were buried. The institutional incentive was to declare success and move on, not to acknowledge failure and fix problems properly. The current status. So where does Ford stand now in 2026? The ship completed its first deployment in 2022, 5 years after commissioning. This deployment was supposed to prove Ford was combat ready. The Navy declared it a success, but independent assessments tell a different story. Email's reliability has improved, but still doesn't meet requirements. The system achieves about 1,200 launches between failures, better than early testing, but far short of the 4,166 required. This means emails breaks down multiple times during typical deployment operations. When emails fails, operations stop. The catapult must be taken offline, repaired, and tested before resuming launches. This delays operations and reduces sortie rates, the exact opposite of what emails was supposed to achieve. The advanced arresting gear works, but requires constant maintenance. It's more maintenance-intensive than the hydraulic systems it replaced. So much for reduced maintenance costs. All weapons elevators are now operational. It only took 6 years, but they still experience failures more frequently than elevators on Nimitz-class carriers. The electromagnetic systems are finicky and require specialized technicians to maintain. The crew size is about what Nimitz carriers have, not 600 fewer, as promised. Turns out automation didn't eliminate jobs. It created different jobs requiring more specialized training. The promised savings never materialized. The total program cost continues growing. Kennedy will commission soon at even higher cost than Ford. Enterprise is under construction and already billions over budget. The Navy is now planning to buy the 4th Ford-class carrier, with costs projected to exceed $15 billion. Has Ford become a capable warship? Sort of. With extensive engineering support, constant maintenance, and reduced operational tempo, the ship can launch and recover aircraft, but it's not the revolutionary leap forward that was promised. It's more like an expensive, finicky carrier that does roughly what Nimitz carriers do, just with more complexity and higher costs. The USS Gerald R. Ford represents one of the most expensive military acquisition disasters in American history. $13 billion for a ship that still doesn't fully work as designed, years behind schedule, with promised capabilities that never materialized. The lessons should be obvious. Don't develop unproven technologies while simultaneously building multi-billion-dollar platforms. Don't overpromise capabilities on unrealistic timelines. Don't create incentive structures that reward failure. Will these lessons be learned? Probably not. The next Ford-class carrier is already repeating many of the same mistakes. But hey, at least the Navy has a really expensive, somewhat functional carrier to show for all that money. If this deep dive into defense acquisition failure made you angry about wasted taxpayer money, smash that like button and subscribe. Comment below. What other defense program disasters should we expose? Share this video. People need to know where their tax dollars go. Until next time, keep questioning the military-industrial complex.